Good morning to you all, and thank you very much, Richard and Rebecca, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to the audience today. I will try to be as engaging and as animated as Snooky, but if not, I will try to be almost as interesting, okay? As Richard has said, I've been here 23 years. I'm married to a Filipina 12 years. My children grew up here, they schooled here, and we did so in relative safety. And I've got to say, I've enjoyed the experience, and I'll be, hopefully, at some stage in my career, retiring here. Today, what I want to talk to you about is some of the, about risk assessments and some of the emerging risks. Now, things are changing, and I think if you go and have a look at what some of the risks are, and there's a lot of security professionals here, and there's an awful lot of people here who have an intense interest in the Philippines and going forward in the businesses here. And many of you, and most of you, in fact, will have worked with some of these risks and most of these risks at varying stages. In fact, a little like we had explained earlier, sometimes we get inured. In other words, we get used to the risks, and we tend to treat them as everyday. Now, some of these are quite unique to the Philippines, and some of them you'll find in most parts of the world. But these are the crime, as we've said, it's there, as Bong told us, it's growing, it continues to grow, the incident of crime. We've got piracy out there now down the southern seas. Certainly wasn't a problem in early days, but certainly is a problem now. We have the potential for terrorism to take place. We have also corruption, kidnappings. We have Islamic terrorism, and we also have communist insurgency, which is going on as we speak today. So these are the issues, and these are the things that are confronting us. But there are things happening, and as it says, can things get worse? Well, I think probably right at the present time we're seeing a period where we are seeing things getting worse. New things are happening. There are emerging risks coming to haunt us and coming to make life a little bit more tricky, a little bit more difficult for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at some of these, and in the process try to explain the actual how you'd go about doing a risk assessment, how you'd approach it to try and understand whether this actually had an impact on you or not. So we'll start off with this, and we'll just look for a start at where we see things which are emerging, which we're not, as the potential did not exist like they do today. And we'll have a look at that. And through this process, we'll try to get an understanding of why we say this and why we say the potential has got greater at the present time. Really, if we're going to do a risk assessment, these are the considerations we'll look at. Number is the source of the threat, the capacity of those and what their capabilities and competencies are, the threat itself, what type of threat that they're making, and that would be a function of the capacity, the intent, and motivation. We'll look at the vulnerabilities, and then we'll look at the likelihood and the consequence. And the consequences really is, at the end of the day, is this something that's going to keep you up at night? Is this something that you really have to matter about, the consequence? Because some risks, petty crime and stuff like that, it's a risk sure enough, but it's not the stuff that keeps us awake at night. But anyway, we'll move on, and we'll look at terrorism in Manila. I've got in my office here, I've got 42 staff. Of those, 35 are research and analysts. Now we collect our researchers, analysts. We collect them from a variety of different sources. We have them from the media, we have them from academia, and we also have some of them from some of the government departments like NICA and the armed forces and places like that. So we've got a good, strong team of people looking at what's going on a continuous basis. So those are the people that are going to help me explain why some of the things that we're going to say today, and try to give you a perspective of why we think that there is a potential for terror to raise its ugly head again inside Manila. Okay, if we're going to look at terror in Manila, then the source of the threat is those, and these groups are known most to us because it's in the paper on a daily basis. You know, the question is it ISIS or is it Abu Sayyaf or is it the Maute brothers? Who is it that the threat emanates from? And that's what we got to make a decision, and we got to try and just make those decisions and decide that. Okay, and really, at the end of the day, when we look at those groups, they are, and for the people who have been here, who have studied this for a long time, much of it is interrelated. So we're not talking about one specific group most of the time. We're talking about many of these different groups working together, whether it be through family, whether it be tribal, whether it be the agency or the group itself. They have the capacity to talk to one another. They have the capacity to assist each other therein. It is something that they are able to do. And as we'll see as we go on, that allows them the ability to take the terror to many parts of the Philippines if they wish. And this is as I've been explaining, the insurgency of the Philippines is, how would I say, is based more on the ethnic and clan basis than it is on the religious side of it, or has been. Now, there are aspects to that are changing. Now, if you go back and if you have a look at Islam in the Philippines, and you to have a look at it and what it has been in the past, Islam Nusantara, which is Islam of Asia, it's pretty benign. It's pretty relaxed, and what I'd say is a soft form of Islam. And as a result, that it has not presented itself as it is today. And the reason why it's presenting itself different today is that we are seeing the radicalization of young individuals and also leadership. This is happening. And the issues that surround that go right back to the 1998, or 1968, 64, 68, one of those dates, was the Jebeda massacre, which is where a large number of Muslim fighters were actually were massacred by the government, the Marcos government of the time. And that actually was the actual catalyst that formed the first, if you want, insurgent movement, which is the Moro National Liberation Front. From that day on, things have progressively developed. As a result of that, we saw a lot of young fighters go to fight in Afghanistan, come back with a new perspective of the fight and the struggle, but also a new view on Islam. And as a result of that, we also saw the input of foreign governments into southern Philippines through funding and also the bringing in of new forms of Islam like Wahhabism. Okay, and so that is now quite present and well entrenched in the Philippines down south. Now, Wahhabism is a lot more aggressive and a lot more intolerant. If you, in fact, it is what drives the problems in the Middle East, basically, and that is now here being present and being taught down south. And if you want to travel down the south, you go have a look around, and you go down into Sarangani, you go into Zamboanga, you go down to Basilan, you go to Tawi-Tawi. You'll see a lot of new mosques which are being built and funded, and in many cases it's by Middle Eastern governments, and you'll find that most of them are teaching Wahhabism. So that is quite significant. People are being taught a more radical form of Islam now. So from our perspective, we believe that it's inevitable that a group like ISIS, the ISIS brand at least, is going to continue to grow. So this is something that we're seeing. The governments recognise it. The government tends to overstate it to a degree. But what we say is that the ideology is here. The organisation is not necessarily. But certainly the ideology is here, and it's been embraced by a lot of these young guys now who have been taught from an early age this new form of Islam. And if you say, okay, if these are the people, what's their capacity? Well, just look at the history. And you look at what has happened, and it's not just down south. You know, routinely there are regular bombings, and we're not talking about 1 or 2 people injured or a couple of killed. We're talking large numbers of people dying. You've had the super ferry bombed in the Manila Bay. You've had the actual Rizal Day bombings, where a large number of people died. The capacity is a proven capacity. These people are able to do this. They're able to do this in most parts of the country if they so wish. So we see that as a problem. The capacity there, the groups are there, and we've actually seen some changes in that group. And there we are. This is just obviously to set the scene. This is the length and the actual extent to which that capacity goes these days. To be able to move into a city and actually engage with the Armed Forces Philippines in combat. That is ever present. The issue surrounding this is that this is not the end. Marawi finishes, it doesn't end there. These groups exist, they've always existed for the past 40 years, they will continue to exist, they have continued to be radicalized, and as a consequence, we can expect more trouble from them. That's the issue going forward. Marawi, once that is settled, and it is likely to be settled in the future, near future, that will not be the end of the insurgency, it will not be the end of a terrorist problem. You know, the ISIS caliphate, and I've already mentioned that. Does it exist? I don't believe a caliphate does exist here. I believe there are disparate groups that have embraced the ideology. What does exist is all those other groups that we saw, the Maute, the Abu Sayyaf, the BIFF, the MLF, the MILF, all those groups have now radical elements within their constituency. That's the problem going forward, not ISIS per se. The problem is that you have these large numbers of young radicals now who are less tolerant, who are now, if you want, more aggressive about what they wish, about the actual, about sovereignty, or about a caliphate in the future. That does exist. You know, one of the things and sad things about the Bangsamoro Peace Accord is the fact that it hasn't been implemented. Because here was a real opportunity, whether you were with the past president or against the past president, whatever it is, the Bangsamoro Peace Accord was a real opportunity to take some of the actual fire out of the problems down south by giving a large sector of those, or the large number of those people down there, an opportunity, self-governments, and also the ability to manage themselves. And that's what they're looking for. And in fact, the MILF are still very keen on pursuing a peace accord and an agreement. But they're a little bit bemused at the moment because they don't know exactly where it's going to go. What the problem with that is, because they're not sure, many of their people, or many of those youngsters, are easily diverted from the course of peace back into a fighting stance. And there goes back to Marawi. You know, a lot of people come out of the woodwork to take up arms there. It wasn't ISIS per se, it was all those different groups coming together to fight. So the Bangsamoro Peace Accord was a real opportunity. It hasn't been implemented. If they did pursue that, I think there was an opportunity to take some of the fire out of the changes that are happening. The potential for more terror to occur could be diminished if you could actually pursue that and actually make that, turn that into something meaningful. Martial law, you know, it's going to be here till Christmas. Martial law, what does it mean to us? Up here in Manila, it doesn't mean much at all. What does it mean to you if you're working down in Mindanao? Once again, it is not going to mean a great deal to you on a work site or a project site. What it is, it's a tool that the actual AFP or the government can use to try and manage the growing problems. You have a look at down Mindanao at the moment, you've got Marawi as a siege situation, but conversely, while that's going on, or concurrently, while that's going on, you've still got the insurgency going on. You've still got the Abu Sayyaf fighting down in Sulu and Basilin. You've still got BFIF fighting in Maguindanao and Lanao Sur. You've got, in fact, last month there were 85 separate incidents, encounters. It's still going on. In fact, when you take that figure and you go back 12 months, you'll find only half as many incidents were occurring. So the intensity has increased. Albeit, you've got the fighting in Marawi, you've also got these other incidents happening around the actual Mindanao region. That is another demonstration of the capacity of the groups down there, what they can achieve if they want. They have the ability, and they are on a, if you want, the warpath. It is problematic, and everybody working down in Mindanao will be subject to that, and we need to take cognizance of the fact that this level of activity is there, and that there is a degree of uncertainty right now. If we have a look at vulnerability, I say just look around you. You come back to the resort world and just see how easy that was. Would it be that easy somewhere else now? In certain cases, it would not be at all. Certainly, a lot of companies have tightened things up dramatically. But I tell you what, you can still go around and you can still have a look at whether it be the malls or your hotels and different venues, and you can still find soft touches. You can still find it very easy. If you go back to the Rizal Day bombings back in 2001, you will see that they didn't even have to go into these places. They attacked the LRT, they attacked the airport, they attacked service stations, there was a whole variety, bus terminals. These are the places, real soft targets, so it's not too difficult. The issues that are out there, the vulnerabilities do exist. And as security professionals here, our job is to make sure we can tighten that up so at least within our sphere of influence, we can make sure that the vulnerability does not, if it does exist, it's something that we can manage. You've got to put in place those programs to actually keep yourself safe. Terror, I believe, and this is, as I said, we've had a look at it, and looked at it closely. We believe that something like the incidents of the past are likely to occur again, and it is the actual writing is on the wall, so to speak. So it's something for you as managers to take cognizance of and get on with. You know, as I said, you can work safely in the Philippines, and I've done so for a long time. The thing is, you manage your safety. You manage your security. You work at it to make things in place. We have managed projects in Basilin, we've managed projects in Lanao, we've managed projects in Cotabato, we've managed projects in Sarangani, we're in Compostela Valley, across the country, right up the north to Kalinga and Abra and all the rest of those places. You can work safely if you have proper programs. And that's what that's about. The likelihood, well, you just have to have groups with the capacity and the ability to exploit the vulnerabilities. There's no maths in that, it's quite simple. But you, as security professionals or as managers, you need to actually look at some of these situations and actually assess for yourself where you think the problem lies and where you think the problems for you lies. Because you can do that. It's just a simple set of rules, and you follow it through and follow the procedure, and just clip through there. You know, who's out there? What's their capacity? What sort of threat do they represent? What sort of threat am I looking at? How do they exploit that? What's the likelihood, and what's the likely consequence? Because if the consequence is going to tell you an awful lot. You know, as I said, if it's a pickpocket, the consequences are negligible, you're probably not going to worry about it. But if the consequences are existential to your business, you need to pay heed. You need to get in there and you need to make sure you're looked after. Just quickly, knowing that there's a something's going to happen, or something could happen. Now let's say, if something could happen, another terrorist threatened thing, so a resort world type incident in a mall. What's your advice to your staff? What have you told your staff they've got to do? Has anybody told their staff? Does anybody want to give me an answer? What sort of advice you'd give to your staff? It's not too difficult. It's three. You've got three opportunities, basically, or three things you can do. Okay, number one, you can hide. Correct? But that's wrong, that's out of order, and where the nearest exit is. So if something happens, you hear those sounds, you can move. Grab your kids and go. Because that's what you need to be doing. Get out if you can. Don't stick around. If you've got the opportunity to leave, leave. Don't stick around to help others. Unless it's your children, immediate family, don't stick around to help others. It's human nature for many to stop and help others. That may make you part of the problem going forward. So, if you can't leave, you hide. Now, you know, we've seen the consequences of what can happen when people go to hide. With the resort world, that was a series and compendium of issues surrounding that. But in general terms, if you can, you hide, you find somewhere hardened that you can get behind or get in and protect yourself, or somewhere you can lock yourself in and barricade yourself in so nobody can get to you. And then I would suggest the last one, as Snooky would have told you, you got to fight. Because if it's happening, and when it happens, you're not got time to think about that. When you're confronted with it, you're not going to outpace the bullet. Your only opportunity is to fight. And those are the things. And this is recommended by the Department of Homeland Security and every other government agency around the world now for active shooter type programs. What you've got to do if it happens. You need to be telling your staff, or the staff need to know these things. If there's a bombing in the mall, what do they do? Do they stop to look around and see what's going on? No, same thing, get out of there. You know, if you feel you've got something to offer because you're a medic or you have a doctor or something along those lines, then you have an ethical issue to deal with in staying. But in general terms, you get out of the place. The potential is that there may be another bomb, or there may be an active shooter to go with it. So get out of town. So the next, from Muslim insurgency and the likes, we'll move on to the MPA. We see that as another emerging problem, a problem which has been, if you want, manageable for a number of years. The MPA, for those who are who don't have the knowledge of it, has been around for 50 years. It started back in the central Luzon, a communist insurgency, and it's been going on for some time now. It is driven by its political wing, the Communist Party of the Philippines, and by its armed wing, the New People's Army. Within the New People's Army, there's something like 40-odd front committees which control fighting units across the country. And they are spread from the top of the country to the bottom of the country. The MPA represent a real issue for the government because it's a law and order and a peace situation thing. There are many people who are, many of the businesses here will have been confronted by communist issues out in the field and out on some of their project sites. They are there. People will say to you it is banditory. In most cases it's banditory. I would say it's ideology in which banditry is used to fund it. And the reason why I say that is that you have a large political wing within the Philippines, Communist Party political wing, which drives an awful lot. And that provides some of the motivation to their front committees out in the field who are doing the fighting. Banditry is what they use, the tools they use. They use extortion in general terms and fear to gain money to continue the fight. And that's how they make their money these days. If you have a look, the Philippines, they are operating in that amount of area. In other words, there's not too many places that you don't touch when you go out there. What the MPA's beef is with the government. They do not, and have not for many years, since 1994, they have not tackled and carried out crimes against, if you want, innocent civilians. Their conflicts, etc., are with the Armed Forces Philippines, and nearly all conflict and nearly all encounters are between the AFP and the communists themselves, whether it's initiated by the army or whether it's initiated by the MPA itself. That's the type of thing that's going on. There are assassinations, but usually they're related to rebel returnees, or they're related to see as abuses of power by political entities within village situations or within cities. So we're seeing assassinations, we're seeing that type of thing go on. If you go back beyond 1994, we did have communists in Metro Manila. We did have Sparrow units, we had the Alex Buyer Brigade, we had them across the country operating in the cities. The potential at the present time is that we are seeing a change. Once again, like the Muslim problem, we're seeing a change in that the intensity of the fight has increased of recent times. Now, that's in part driven by the fact that there was a great deal of hope put into peace negotiations. The peace negotiations fell apart, and shortly thereafter we had martial law implemented down south, and we have had a reaction to that. And we've had the Defence Secretary declare a war against the MPA to wipe them out, and we've also had the President declare a war against them at the present time. Whilst this has all been going on, you've got Secretary Jester Reyes has been working actively to try and bring some sort of sense to it all and try to bring it all back round. And in fact, that Jester Reyes has certainly got his work cut out for him when you think of the challenges ahead for him with both the Muslim insurgency and also the communist insurgencies. But he's doing his best in a very, very difficult situation. Competency and capabilities, as I said, they're out there. You look up there, there we are. That's the Presidential Security Group was attacked in Cotabato. That was only 2 months ago. That's the type of thing. So if the Presidential Security Group isn't safe, how safe are your people down there? You've got to start to pay attention to these types of things. We think they are going to be, this is going to be ongoing unless, of course, they can bring them back to the negotiating table. As I said, with capacity, the intent, right at the present time, much of what's going on is driven by the fact that we have not been able to bring together a peace accord or a peace agreement. And if you want, it's almost from the communist side, they feel let down. From the government side, they've been issued with demands that they certainly cannot meet. Basically, the communists are asking for constitutional changes which the Philippine government could not agree to. And as a consequence, it is the opportunity is not present right at the present time. The capacity and intent exists right now for them to continue the fight. And once again, if you go back and you look for the 6 months prior to Christmas, you saw activity levels around about 60 incidents per month. Right at the moment, we're about 110 on an average per month. So it's really ramped up. So for you out in the field, there's lots going on. So, and one of the key things to it all, and one of the going back to one of the things I said earlier, is this just hold on, I'll get you back to the war tax. Okay, going back, one of the key things that you're interfacing with is revolutionary taxes. Revolutionary taxes, if they're not agreed to, will bring about violence. When I say violence, it's usually attacks against your facilities, and that's occurring. And that's, when we look at the number of incidents at the present time, that has increased. We're seeing an increase in the number of incidents related to war taxes at the present time. So these are the issues that you out there, that many of you who are working, not just Mindanao, but this is across the country, working in the rural areas, will be interfacing with. And it is a problem. But it's one you need to address. It doesn't mean to say you give up on what you're doing, and I don't think there's one company here who's actually moved off site. But it's certainly something you've got to address. It's a difficult one. Good grief. Once again, comes down to when you look at these things like exploitation and opportunity, of vulnerabilities, this is it, it exists. Heck, I'm a member of Pico de Loro, right? And I could have been there that day, for gosh sakes. I was there many weekends, I'm out there. Places are being raided for their weapons and also for war, as part of war tax demands. The plantations, I know Snooky's probably dealt with this many times. Yep. And certainly I got to deal with it many times. Bus companies, mining companies, power industry, all are seeing this happening and interfacing with these issues. It's a problem and something that you should be prepared for, because at the present time we've seen an uptake. So there's more interest in actually gathering funds right at the moment, and as a consequence there are pressures that are being applied. And once again, if you just look at the threat and the vulnerability, the threat of war tax demands and the actual where you are, what you're doing, you can't hide from it. It's ever present. And as I said, this exists across the country right at the moment. So that's the MPA. We believe that the MPA are going to represent a growing threat at the present time, especially for rural-based companies or operations, and that will increase. This is actually something that happened just recently, but it's something to take into account. When you've got executives and people travelling around late at night, you'd think travelling to Batangas has been safe, and that you can do this sort of trip at nights. And many people have been doing this for a long time. You're going to the resorts in Batangas and you're travelling home late at night. You're going to a project site in Batangas and you're travelling home late at night. We are starting to see things now which are happening on the roads. Goodness gracious, we haven't seen anything happen in Cavite for many years, but we've had a couple of incidents of terrorist MPA attacks in Cavite of recent times. War tax demands and taxes. So, do your staff know what to do? Number one, don't put yourself in the situation. Avoid it. Don't travel late at night. Avoid these types of things. Then you're not going to interface with this type of event. Do all your staff know what a checkpoint is and what happens at a checkpoint? Your staff need to know these things. because at the end of the day, they will likely interface. It's certainly, if they're travelling down Mindanao at the present time, if staff are moving regularly in Mindanao, they'll need to know about checkpoints. They need to know what they're obliged to do. They need to know what their obligations are and what the rules are. And there are rules for it, and the government has published the rules. The big one there is, what do you do if it's not the PNP, the Philippine National Police or the Armed Forces of the Philippines? What can you do? Well, I would suggest it's too late. You're there. It almost comes back to this, the scenario with the kidnap. Once it's happened, there's not much you can do it. You could try to flee. That's about your only opportunity. But if they have long arms, that's not it may not be the safest one to choose. I would suggest, going back to it, make sure your staff don't put themselves in the place or in the presence where that opportunity exists to do this, to be stopped and shaken down. I put this in as an emerging risk. And the reason why I put that in there is because, as a company, we have had to deal with, on 2 occasions, just in the last month, of people who have been shaken down through this war, by the supposed war on drug. These are expatriates who have got into confrontation with a business partner or somebody else, and as a direct result, allegations have been made and they've been used against them and causing them a great deal of grief, a lot of fear, and ultimately, in one case, the actual guy has packed his family up and they've gone back to the States. And on the other case, the guy is now currently in court fighting the charges against him. These were spurious. When we looked at these in each case, we looked at the thing, they were spurious allegations made because of a conflict between 2 people. So you need to understand that this is a potential for people to use the war on drugs as another tool to actually extort or to actually cause you harm. You know, we all go this in business. We go through these spurts of growth and the need to actually bring things back to reality at times, and we have to lay people off and we retrench people and do things like that. You know, the potential now is, instead of death threats you get through your text, the potential now is you could have allegations made in relationship to the use of drugs, and that is happening. So that's something you've got to be aware of, and something. How do you prepare? We'll look at this quick scenario, and how could it possibly happen that somebody could come into your office with a warrant for your arrest, and you have no idea whatsoever? How could it happen? It could be a conflict within the office. It could be a conflict with a neighbour, and in fact one of these incidents that I described was a conflict with a neighbour, which turned really nasty. It could be your association with certain individuals who have been linked. It could be your kids tied up with other kids who are linked to it. There are a whole host of different ways in which you could actually have the finger pointed at you. So you really need to scrutinise, and as I said, do your own internal assessment as to whether there's an opportunity amongst your behaviour, within your yours and your family's social behaviour, to whether this could represent a risk to you. You need to pay attention to these things because they're happening. Gosh, we've seen some of the allegations and some of the things that have happened. And there are definitely people who have been subject to vigilante killings who were not drug users. That's the potential. So how do you make sure it doesn't happen to you or your staff or the people that you work with? Think about it, because it's a problem. We've already had a talk about kidnapping. But what I want to talk to you about now is the kidnapping and the emergence of what I see as a greater risk. As been described, the history of kidnapping as such is that you have the kidnap, you have the demand, you meet the demand, the people go home safe. That's traditionally been the way it's worked. You negotiate it out and you settle out and people go home safe. Unfortunately, with the influence of, if you want, Muslim insurgency, Islamic terrorism, whatever you want to call it, with the advent, we've seen the levels of violence increase dramatically. If you go back the past 10 years, from 2016 back, you'll see 1 to 2 people per annum would die in the Philippines in a kidnapping. There's about 100 kidnappings on average per year in the Philippines. You'd see 1 to 2 people would die, and that usually because as something which would occur in the actual taking, the time the kidnap took place, or it would be an illness of some sort, something like that. This year alone, we're seeing 13 people die. It turned a lot nastier. So what I'm asking you is that people say it's safe to travel around now. It's safe to take a break somewhere. I would agree in general terms it is. But I think you need to do your homework. You need to plan your holidays like you plan anything. What you perceive as safe is a perception unless you've investigated and interrogated it. And I've just recently got back from a holiday in Bohol on Panglao Island. I had no problems with that, but I made sure I knew what security arrangements were before I went there. And that's the type of thing people are going to be doing. Just not take it in blind faith that things are easy and things will be okay. You know, you've got to understand what's going on. You know, the potential is that these groups can move across large distances of water to carry out their attacks. We've seen a huge change in the amount of money changing hands in kidnaps lately. If I go back to the early 90s and mid-90s, where I was involved in these things, kidnappings, the ransoms were ranging in around about $1.5–2 million. Those are the demands, and you could negotiate them down substantively from there. There was quite a sea change during the period from mid-90s up to the, say, 2010, where the ransoms were all very, very small, relatively small, and very quick. The bad guys got the idea that you could just quickly turn things over. By kidnapping, don't make the ransom too exorbitant. You could actually get the money agreement, get the payments made, and get people out quickly and get the money transferred. And they were able to turn people over quicker and also avoid police interventions. Now, some of that came about because the Philippine National Police actually got very good at with their kidnap task force. And so it was the interest of the bad guys to actually avoid them. And to avoid them, they get the ransoms down. Well, that's changed. We've seen actually a shift back to very large ransoms. And most of that's being driven by the Abu Sayyaf and the groups down south. So now there is the spectre of a large return. And so we now see the Abu Sayyaf travelling large distances to carry out their attacks. Exactly where the Abu Sayyaf can go if they wish. Now, if you imagine that they all travel in pump boats, some of those distances are quite large. Close by, they have the capacity to perhaps travel there, carry out their goal, and then move out again, because they have support to be able to carry out the endeavour. So what that does, it makes the area within that inner circle, I think, not so safe. What it says is that they have the capacity to be able to travel those distances to do that. I go back to the actual, what I said a little earlier. This is why you need to make sure that when you book a holiday, you know and understand what the resort is doing for your safety. There are many resorts out there within that sphere you can go and safely stay because they have good security. There are others out there who have done very little about it. And if you don't think that will not be recognised, because you've got all those Muslim enclaves around there, there are people who may be feeding this information back to the bad boys. Why did they go to Somal Island? Because they knew what was there. They knew that the marina was there. They knew that the boats were there. They knew that there was expats in those boats. And they knew there was no security there. So if you're giving advice to people who run resorts, who are running holidays, or whatever it is, advice should be, make sure you have good security plans for your guests. And make sure your guests are aware that you're looking after their safety. Because you can. Because kidnapping is a problem. That's 2016. This is this year so far to July. So we can see that it is happening. We can't deny it. These are the ethnic groups that are taken. What I would say is that this is a reflection of the maritime capabilities of the Abu Sayyaf and the groups down south right at the moment. It is allowing them to take people off boats down in the southern seas, down in the Sulu and Celebes seas. This year, that's once again nationalities. If you have a look, kidnapping for ransom is still happening in Metro Manila, it's still happening in Luzon, it's still happening in the Visayas region. Not to a great extent, but certainly Metro Manila, it is still a problem that you need to recognise and the likes. But going back to my concern, and the concern that we have, is that people are still travelling, still holidaying, still doing their thing, and they're not necessarily taking care, or their own duty of care for them and their families as to where they're going. They're not thinking the process through to make sure they're safe when they get there. And you need to be advising your people that that's what they should be doing. You need to be telling them to take care. You need to be telling them to ask the questions. Because only by asking the questions will you get an answer. Now, in amongst all this, the security services have never been so busy. When you think of the numbers of communist incidents occurring, when you think of the number of Muslim insurgency incidents that are occurring, when you think of the siege of Marawi, you overlay that with the war on drugs, the poor policeman and the poor soldier doesn't have a moment to himself. They are strapped. They don't have the capacity to respond to everything that's going on. Their budget has been sucked up. They don't have the funds to actually do the jobs they want to do, and it's really difficult for them. It is tough times because they're engaged in fighting, they're engaged in a war, several different wars on several different fronts. It is difficult. That is a problem, and that's why it comes back to you. That's why it comes back to us. We have to make our own arrangements in many cases to make sure we have planned everything correctly. That we've put in place the plans to actually help out, to make sure it doesn't happen. We've done the training to make sure it doesn't happen. Those are the things you've got to be doing to try and avoid some of these things occurring to you or your staff or your family. Because they are problems that exist at the moment. They are becoming more problematic. We think it's more likely going to continue to increase for the next probably 6 months to a year at least. We are hoping that the government will actually get back to the negotiating table with the Banks of Marawi Peace Accord. And it's also a hope that they'll actually get the communists back to the table to talk and take some of the heat away. But unless those two things happen, the problem's going to keep on and it's going to meander on until we all get inured and used to it again. Okay, that's the end of my talk, and I'll now pass it back over to Richard, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.